So, welcome to the Politics Inc. podcast, where we explore the world of politics through the lens and perspective of political cartoonists. My guests today are Cori Redford and R. Alan Brooks, co-creators of the award-winning comic strip What I Miss from the Colorado Sun. Cori is an acclaimed and prolific artist and published author of her own fantasy creature book, Dungeons After Dark. R. Alan Brooks, he is the author of two graphic novels, The Burning Metrodome and Anguish Garden. His graphic novel artwork is featured at the Denver Art Museum's renovated Western exhibit. He hosts two podcasts, How Art is Born, as well as Mother, Blanker, and a Cape. I have kids. And if that wasn't enough, he teaches an MFA level program in graphic novel writing for Regis University. Cori, Alan, thank you so much for joining me today and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Great. Well, I wanted to open it up and just see what brought your interest into cartooning and who inspired you each as artists or cartoonists.
Or you want to go first?
Sure. So, when I was a kid, obviously it was like Gary Larson and Jim Davis, but especially Calvin and Hobbes creator Bill Watterson. Then in high school, it was Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld, which, that's a little embarrassing in retrospect, but I copied lots of their pictures. And then as an adult, I think Linda J. Barry is still very inspiring for me.
Yeah. Linda's work is great, so I totally agree with you on that. Yeah.
Yeah. On a side note, Rob Liefeld has a podcast called Robservations, which I tried listening to for a little while, but it's just kind of him ranting, so I couldn't stick with it for very long.
That sounds about right. That was on brand for Rob.
Right. Okay, so my dad's a journalist. He was deputy managing editor for the money section of USA Today he worked at USA Today for 30 years. And when I was 5, he wanted to encourage a love of reading. So he bought me my first comic books, which happened to be The Flash. Barry Allen was on trial for killing the Reverse Flash. And that sort of set me off on a path of loving superhero comic books for all my life. And I grew up in Atlanta, and I knew no other people who were into comic books except one other friend who went to a different school. And so, I hardly ever could talk to anybody about it. And then when I was around 10, my mom was like, "Hey, I saw something in the paper. It's called a comic book convention. Do you think you want to go to that?" And so I was like, "Yeah." So she, because it was the 80s, she dropped us off, me and my friend. So we were 10 years old. We went, and we were the only Black people and the only kids. But it was wonderful, though. It was like the one time a year where we could talk to other people about all these secret worlds and stories that we loved. So I've been reading comics my entire life, and the only time that I've slacked off from it was the 90s when Image came in, and I was not a fan of all those X-Men derivative titles, but it is worth mentioning that I really like Calvin and Hobbes a lot too, and I would read that all the time, and Far Side as well. But in the early 2000s, I kind of came back to it. I went to a convention, and first of all, I was like, "Wow, there are women here. I love this," because it wasn't like that before. Yeah. But it wasn't until maybe 2016 that I decided that I was going to try and write comics.
Okay.
So,
and that's right around the same time, you both met. And it seems like, I think that was when the Sun first came out. How did you guys meet? And then how did you guys kind of co-create or come up with the idea of What I Miss? And for those who don't know, I think there's a certain genius you guys created, whether it was accidental or on purpose. But for people who don't know, the comic What I'd Miss is what they create. And it's all about Myra. She had a coma. She's been in a coma for 30 years of her life, and she became friends with her next door neighbor, Aussie. So that construct within itself, I think, really opens the door to get into so much social commentary, because obviously so much has happened in the last 30 years. So it's not your typical political cartoon. But what I love is it it isn't your typical political cartoon, which is great, but it opens the door for all these social things you could bring up of so much has changed in 30 years. Look at this observation, and just the natural conversations they have just really set it up well to talk about and have these great perspectives from two different generations of people on what's happening socially now. So would love to get your perspective of how How'd I Miss came to be.
That was a great description, by the way, Jim. I'm gonna have you do our PR, man. So
you got it.
So Cori, I'll start with my perspective, and then you could pick up where you come in.
Okay.
So I put out my first independent graphic novel in 2017, and around that time is when the sun was starting, and Larry and Kevin were kind of looking around for who does comics in Denver because Kevin especially wanted to have a comics section to their new paper as they were starting the Sun. And so they heard about me, and we met at Mutiny Information Cafe, which is kind of like my home base.
Yeah.
And so they were like, hey, we're thinking of doing this. Do you think you could come up with a weekly comic? And of course, I had never done it, but I was like, yes, I can. Give me 2 weeks. So I really tried to think about so with the limitations of a weekly comic, the conversations have to be short. It's not long form fiction, which is the thing I was a little more inclined towards.
Okay.
So I was like, okay, if I have two characters, let's say two characters who are Black, then it sort of becomes a Black comic, or two characters who are women, it becomes like a woman comic. It's a weird kind of thing, how people perceive things. So I thought, well, if I have two characters who are demographically contrasted, then the conversations become more about the world and not just who they are demographically. And then I thought, well, why would these people be talking? I felt insecure about it. So I was like, why would these people be talking about stuff that's happening? So I came up with the coma thing, which we certainly lean on a lot less after 5 years of doing it, but it was a good way to start things,
Yeah, it's a good device to at least set up like why they're having these conversations, the person place problem. Yeah.
Yeah. But now like the strength of their friendship allows for that to happen. And so then I thought about what artists I know, and Cori and I knew each other from Denver Drink and Draw, which is like a group of comic book artists who get together and drink and draw. And I used to just hang out there casually. I wasn't trying to do stuff. It was the first time I knew a group of people who like comic books. And I had been going there since maybe 20. And so, we just kind of knew each other from that. And I was like, oh, Cori seems to be able to draw a whole bunch of different styles based on what I've seen. So I asked if Cori would be interested, center the pitch, and then Cori, you can pick it up from there.
Yeah. So I'd been going to Drink and Draw for a while and had gotten into comics again there. I mean, I had been dabbling over time, but Alan and I had talked about doing other projects together. But so when he asked me to do this, I was like, yeah, that sounds like something I would really like to do. It was a very exciting opportunity.
And how does a collaboration work? I know just for myself, staring at a piece of paper is usually where it starts for me. But it must be a luxury for both of you in a way, because you both work independently, but to come together and to have that collaboration where you could say, hey, I've got this idea. I don't know if it means anything, or a throwaway line or something that could turn into something bigger. And again, there's always the last 4 years have given us plenty of things to talk about politically.
Right.
But I would love to hear how the collaboration starts and how it kind of works, and what's the weekly rituals, or what are the ways you guys both approach a subject, and how does that kind of bounce back and forth between the two of you?
Okay, well, so it starts with me. So generally, I'll say at first, because I knew it was drawing like one full colored page a week, I tried to keep it very simple. Like I was like, maybe they'll just be hanging out on the balcony every week. And I thought that would be a benefit to Cori, but it turned out that it was like boring. But I think a collaborative relationship is like any relationship, right? Like you learn each other's strengths, you learn where each other needs like support, that kind of thing. So at first I was always very specific about where things happen. But as I got to know Cori as a creator, I realized, if I just let go of where the places are, Cori will draw these, like she'll set it somewhere beautiful and do a great job. So now I only specify the location if it has something to do specifically with what they're talking about. So generally, I write a script. I look, sometimes it's there. Sometimes I'm looking at like what's happening in the news, and trying to like find something off of that. And so I write like a one-page generally script. Say panel one, this happens. Panel two, this happens. With other artists that I collaborate with, I'm a little more specific or maybe inflexible. Like those things being changed because for long form fiction, it's important that it is kind of the beats that I say. But with this comic and Cori, I might go panel one, panel two, and then Cori has a great idea to, instead of doing it in 6 panels, Cori will do it in 5, that kind of thing. And all that I'm really concerned about is if the intent, the spirit of what it is that I'm trying to get across, is still intact. And what I love is that Cori takes that spirit and then elevates it to a whole other level and adds, visual humor to amplify things. And yeah, so what do you have to say about that, Cori?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Alan's scripts are very tight, though. I mean, like I can think of maybe 4 or 5 times in years that I've had to suggest a change or thought that a word might be different because he's, he knows what he's doing. And so I try to match that energy. And
No.
like this week, I was able to, to create some subtext for his super text to put the we were talking about trad wives, women who live a traditional, 1950s aesthetic in a thrift store. So they were talking about traditional things that fit with the background. So, that's kind of our synergy is my backgrounds and trying to find ways to add my own humor and
Yeah. No, because I was going to say, it seems like just the balance you guys have, and it's great because when I look at it and just knowing the two of you from day one when we met, I'm always curious of that back and forth and how that kind of flows. And then I see one with Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass from a few months ago.
That was in the script.
Okay, all right. I wasn't sure. I mean, you gave Abraham Lincoln some awesome abs. I just want to say that. And without a beard, he looks almost GQ-ish. So it's great to see.
Right.
But I think just it's great that you both give each other the liberty to explore, find something new from a visual standpoint, that you're not kind of constrained maybe to say, oh, it's got to be in this particular setting or it's got to be here. And I think that's the beauty of what you do, Cori, is the way you set the characters up, whether it's like a location or they're on a walk or they're on the front porch. But sometimes it's these flashbacks or these flash forwards to things that is such a unique style, or you do these amazing portraits of people, and it just is a great way of really setting up the tone for what Alan wrote. So I love that it's this great mix of realistic portraiture, the characters, and then these kind of surreal moments they have.
I think that I remember.
Go
ahead. I was going to say, I remember the exact time that started was in a comic about the civil rights and voting rights specifically. And Alan wanted kind of a flashback to one of Aussie's, like his uncle or his grandfather denied the opportunity to vote. And so I modeled it on some historic photos, and I could tell, and Alan was like, oh yeah. And so he started putting more of that into his scripts, so that, and that's good for me because that's, it's fun to break up the regular format and to use some of my illustration skills.
Yeah. Okay. So what I was going to say is, I definitely, like I was saying, it's a relationship, right? So I had to learn that this is something that works well when writing for Cori. And so like for me, it's like, oh, okay, she's dope at this, so I should make sure that that I bring it into the script. And it also makes the comic more dynamic, right? Because you have characters doing something, and then you get these really cool portraits or strong illustrations, and it just, I don't know, it's like a really cool and beautiful contrast, you know?
And I guess with that, then, what is the structure? Because I know deadlines are deadlines. I think they're healthy for artists or creators of all kind. How far in advance do you sit and write, and what does your week look like leading up to usually like Wednesday night, Thursday morning for a deliverable? What does that look like for the two of you then? When do you start? If there's a news story or something politically happens, how do you leave that flexibility, or do you leave the flexibility into your schedule to chase a headline or to chase something in the news, or to just, no, we're going to focus on Aussie's great grandparents or great grandfather?
Yeah. I'll say we live on the edge a little bit. Like at first I was trying to do like 7 to 9 weeks ahead,
Oh,
uh but I think that also stopped us from being able to react to things. And I also was trying to do a more like a continued narrative, um, which I also don't think worked very well. So when we kind of found what the rhythm was, generally now on Monday, I'm trying to write down an idea and finish it by Tuesday.
mm-hmm.
Then Corey draws it on Wednesday, and then I send it to the Sun on Thursday. And that's kind of how it goes every week.
That's great. And do you send just one option, or do you send multiple options over?
It's usually just one for the week.
Okay.
And every once in a great while, Corey will be like, "Oh, I don't understand this," or "Hey, have you thought about this?" Which is very helpful because like it's impossible to see every side of an issue, so that they have both their heads on it.
That's such a great point, because again, I think that's the beauty of what you both have from a chemistry standpoint. Is it's not just, again, going back to the beginning and when you guys first launched. It's so easy in this, black and white, choose a side world where uh, politics can feel like, oh, it's one or the other. But you guys bring such a dynamic point of view to each of these. And it comes organically from the two of you just sitting there, thinking through an idea, getting a different perspective, and getting feedback on that. So that's just, I guess, a beautiful marriage of what the comics are truly about, is the chemistry you two have, which is rare to find.
Yeah. High five, Corey.
Yeah. So how do you think then political editorial cartoons, how do you think they fit in the narrative of what's going on in society? A couple, 20, 30 years ago, there were two newspapers per town and, two editorial cartoonists per town or major city. Now I think it's really dwindled down to less than maybe 50 on-staff cartoonists around the world or in the United States. What do you think the importance of having a political point of view from a paper's perspective, or just the idea of what we do as political cartoonists? How do you think that is still valued in the world, or do you think it's a dying art that needs to be brought back?
May I?
Well, yeah, please.
I think it's really important, and I think that what I hear from people, like if I meet somebody at a party or something, they're likely to say, "Oh yeah, I share this with my aunt or my uncle or my mom to help them understand this thing that's going on in a way that's digestible, that has a perspective, and lets them, share this is why people are mad about this, or this is why people are excited about this." And so I think from that perspective, it's a really useful tool for education and for quickly conveying information or a viewpoint in a way that, sharing a news article probably really isn't. It doesn't have the same impact or relatability.
No, that's great. And do you see when you meet people, do they ask you like, "Oh, what do you do?" "I do political cartoon, or I do this comic." How do people react to you? Because it was interesting you said that, of it kind of helps break the ice, but then once you give it to someone or they see it, it's a little bit easy to digest, and they go, "Oh, wow, you did this." How do people kind of take that from knowing you did that and hearing your point of view on things?
I think that either they're like, "Oh yeah, that's cool," and and they're like, "I'll look at it later," or they've already seen our comic, and that's
Yeah.
kind of cool. Like, I always wonder how much of that is just because they know someone I know, but sometimes it's, just independently they just happen to read our comic, and that's that's pretty much the only like direct feedback that I get, and so that's always nice. And I don't know that people have a lot of, I don't need to sit around tooting my own horn, so it's usually just moves along.
So I want to say one, this is very cool because me and Cori don't really talk about this, so it's cool to hear what your experiences are with it out in the world, Cori. So for me, I find like random places where people are into the comic. For one, one of the founders of the Sun, Kevin, he talked about how his sister uses our comic to discuss issues with her Bible study group in Texas.
Whoa.
Yeah, and so I was
That's
like, oh, I
great.
didn't know that would be our demographic,
Yeah.
So that's very cool. And then like I remember a few years ago I was out dancing like on Halloween or something, and I saw somebody I hadn't seen in a long time. And so he and I were catching up and he had a date with him. And he was like, "What are you doing now?" I was like, "Oh, I'm doing this comic for the Colorado Sun." And his date was like, "You write that? I just sent it to my mom." Like,
Oh, that's awesome.
yeah. So those are pretty cool. And yeah, like I just have these moments where I meet people, and if they've read it, they're generally pretty engaged and excited about it. There's a guy who he runs he's one of the people who runs Fort Collins Comic Con, and he runs one called Wicked West. His name's Todd Jones. Said that he feels like the comic is that our comic teaches people empathy. Something that I specifically thought about, but like to hear his experience of it was really cool.
No, I love that because I think that kind of gets at the core again from the setting standpoint. And again, you guys continue to add new layers and dimensions to each of the characters. But you're right; it's a great way of having a conversation that doesn't feel like a yelling talking head that we see on the news every night. So, wow, I've never even looked at it like that, but that's a beautiful way of expressing that idea of empathy. So, no, that's awesome to hear. With that being said, you guys get direct feedback. I know sometimes having an email address or your contact information, if something maybe is polarizing, have you gotten any one-on-one feedback from people? And if so, I'd love to swap some stories with you.
Okay. Well, sometimes like people email me directly, and I'm like, "How did they get my email?" Then I realized my email's listed on the. Yeah, but I didn't realize it for a couple of years. But I was like, "Why do people send me stuff?" But generally, if they email me directly, it's like positive, like, or it's like, "Oh, did you know about this?" Like, we did something about redlining, the history of redlining, and somebody wrote me and said, "Do you know that this also happened to Asian people?" Which I did not know.
Oh.
So then I wrote a follow up, about that, or the history of Chinatown in Denver, which I also didn't know. So that actually helped me. So I wrote about that, and so we did a comic about that. But there was one time. So we deal with so many. Cori, you think you remember this, but there's so many volatile issues that we deal with. There's only one that people threaten to like cancel their subscription to the Sun over, and it was first of all they came to there's a Facebook page for the comic, so they came there. There was one where we talked about Mitch McConnell intentionally holding back bills, which he's bragged about. Like that's not
it's not buried anywhere. He verbally said he's going to do this.
Yeah, like it's a point of pride for him. And we're talking about just how the Senate and the House works together, and essentially that it needs to be reevaluated. But just that made people so angry.
Yeah. Well, it was also the how they tally votes by the name for it is slipping my mind.
Yeah.
But yeah, there were people saying, "Did you not go to high school?" Like, yeah, I went to high school. I understand what this is. I just don't like it. I know it is, I just don't like it.
There was a whole person like, "I'm a liberal, and this makes us look stupid," and I'm done with the Sun. And it's just funny because like I feel like we've dealt with so many more volatile things, but that was the thing, and you could never predict it.
Wow.
And then the next week I wrote something that kind of addressed what they said, and then they came back and they were mad about it because I didn't engage with them on the Facebook page because for me it's kind of like, what's the point? Like they weren't asking an honest question; they just came on some big mad stuff. So,
The
but clearly
electoral
they did not
college.
cancel their yes.
The
Well,
electoral
but
college.
clearly
That's
they
what it
did
was.
not. They didn't stop reading because they read it the next week and came back mad about it. So,
Nothing to do. I mean, I think that's a great example of if someone's mad, they're just going to try to prove their point just to be heard. But I love that you both listen, engage, and then hear that side of it, and then could do a completely different, comic the week or two later that addresses that point of view or brings it up or isn't trying to kowtow, but is being honest. But you're learning and listening, and I think that's really important and a great perspective of what you both do.
I think that's one of the reasons why people are sharing it with their aunts or uncles, because I think Alan does a really good job of representing an opposing viewpoint in a way that is not infantilizing or making them out to be idiots, even if it's not a very I mean even when in many places where I would not have any kind thing to say about that person, Alan is able to soften it to a much more reasonable tone. So, even though it's easy for me to see how that thing that person is saying is so stupid, Alan is able to humanize them so that the somebody with a differing viewpoint is not going to necessarily feel attacked.
Yeah. No, and I think, and again, great posture you both have in that sense too, because it is easy to be, hey man, I just put my art out there and this is my point of view. I have this platform, take it or leave it. I don't have to, you don't have to agree with me and that's fine. So I think the fact that you're able to create dialogue or not to snap back is a great posture to have, because it's so easy to just be like, whatever, or to answer every one of the, the comments of hate below, which I don't think you both get. But there are people out there and that they have nothing to do with their day, I'm sure. And it just makes them feel good to get whatever's off their chest.
Yeah, I think. Well, one, I want to say, I feel like the best iteration of any collaboration is that it should be the end product should be something that neither of us could have created on our own, right? So,
Yeah.
So like what I do with Cori in this comic, I could not do on my own. I could not do with another artist. So I love that there's enough of both of our personalities that it represents its own thing. But also when I'm trying to understand somebody who is on the opposite side of an issue, I feel like there's a minority of people who choose to be hateful, and who like willingly want to destroy the other, people who are not like them, right?
Yeah.
And that small minority, they're very vocal, but if I react to them, I'm not going to change their minds. They've actually made a decision. They know what it is that they've chosen.
Yeah.
But in between that extreme and me, there are many more people who are sometimes swayed by the rhetoric of those people in an extreme.
Yeah.
And those people come to it, even if I don't agree with the conclusions, they usually come to it from some pure intention that gets corrupted by fear or a lot of times fear and anger, right? And so to represent them in a humane way is one step closer to bringing them towards seeing the humanity of the position that I believe in.
Yeah.
And so that's an important element to me in this comic.
No, that's great. And I think that's a beautiful way you stated it too, because getting in a shouting match, however the medium, be it email or wherever, isn't going to change someone's heart. So to your point, treating them like a human being is almost like a lost art these days. Because you're right, you're not going to drown out the echo chamber they're stuck in, but to meet them where they're at or to treat them in that sense of humanity and that posture, I think goes further. And it also just goes to show the level I think both of you take with the craft of what you're doing, and by humanizing it like that, again, it just reflects the heart and soul you put into the work you do, and it feels kind of on brand for what you do from a comic standpoint. So bravo to both of you for taking the high road when you can. It's not easy.
Hey Jim, I want Yeah. Well, I want to ask. I mean, I know that you've been asking us questions, but since
Yeah.
you're somebody who deals with these issues yourself and is thinking of like in the same medium, how is it for you? Like, how are you coming up with your ideas? How are you wrestling with these complex things?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think for me, again, I don't have a political agenda or political party. I think there's so much theater in what's been going on recently
Hmm.
that I try to just peel back and get to the nerve of like, does anyone else see how crazy this is? Because I grew up with looking at politics as, probably from a more punk perspective of, oh, I'll never, care about it. But there is a draw, and I feel like there is a draw of understanding what's going on. And I feel like politics in the last, I'd say since 2000, has become a team sport, where
Hmm.
people, post religious era in America, people are, making their own decisions, trying to find their tribe. And I think that's great if people need that to help define who they are. But I feel in that it has grown exponentially to, oh, I have to choose a side based on one issue or one topic, where there's no middle ground or there's no way for people to change their mind. So all that being said, I try to find that one moment or that one thing, and how do I extract the humor out of it, or how do I find the absurdity in it? Because it is some days you just can't believe what's going on, that you're like, oh, I got to just like hit that. And so I will look for that and search for that. And so Kevin probably goes crazy when I send him over 10 options on a Wednesday night. Hey, I'm thinking this, I'm thinking that. And he's just like, I like option 4, but maybe option 1, so I
Oh,
love having
wait. So
that.
that's actually cool to hear. Wait, so you before you do a comic, you send over kind of like what your options of what you're thinking?
Yeah, I'll send over my goal is no less than 3 options of, hey, this is news
Yeah.
that I think is going to be big on Friday this weekend. Here's something that's very Colorado, and here's something that's just kind of out there. So that's why, again, having that collaboration that you guys have is great. My collaboration is with Kevin of, hey, I got these ideas. Sometimes it's a sure shot of, yeah, this feels right. What do you think? And then sometimes
Hmm.
he's able to dissect some of those, like, ooh, this could be sensitive because X, Y, and Z
Right.
that I didn't even think about. So
Right.
yeah, that's kind of my process is blank, blank piece of paper, deadline is like my friend and my enemy. But starting on Monday morning, I try to find something that might be relevant. And then, yeah, Wednesday night, I'll send over options. And then Thursday morning, I'll get the final over to them. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's pretty
we
cool.
yeah, that's a very different process because we do one very tight finished product and then just cross our fingers that there's not a big change to it. And I think
Yeah.
there's maybe been once or twice where I thought, there might be a problem with this, you know, like I think there was one a month or two ago where I was like, I hope we don't get sued. But other than that, I think that we just are send a finished product.
But how great that there is something, I think, dynamic about that feeling of, ooh, I don't know what this is going to do, but I got to get it out. And to have a little bit of that fear, I have to say, it's almost like a good feeling of, ooh, what could happen if we get this out in the world?
Hmm.
So I love that you had that moment of, ooh, we could get sued, but to still get it out there, I think is what makes our profession and what we do so dynamic and so different than other, being a banker, being a butcher, whatever that is. There's something nice that we get a commentary on it, and then there could be repercussions, there could not be repercussions.
Yeah, one of the cool things that you said, Corey, uh maybe during 2020 was that doing this comic makes you feel like we're actually doing something about what's happening in the world. And I hadn't thought about it till you said it, but I love that. I love that we get to have a reaction and process things that are happening from week to week. And now at this point, we have definitely done more pages together than I've done with any other artist. So that's pretty cool.
That's awesome. Yeah.
I think
No, and
we're at
6 years, right? 6 years every week.
yeah. We'll hit
Wow.
300 in a couple months. Sometime this
Yeah,
year we'll
it's
hit
amazing.
300. Yeah.
Yeah. What a
Right.
great experience, though, to have, again, that collaboration and to see how it's changed and morphed. And you're right. I think that is kind of the elixir of what makes this so potent. Is you get to do something, because I love that too. Do something that matters in the world, and do something that you're kind of using your creative superpowers, if you will, for good, or even maybe not just for good, but just for yourself or for the audience out there too. Of like, oh, someone out there is going to resonate with this issue, and this could do something, whether it's, you know, a kid down the street or someone in a different state. But I think just the idea of the power that it has, there's something kind of, I don't want to call it addicting, but there is something nice that what we do can actually make that one-to-one contact with someone.
Yeah, we did a book of the first few years of our comic, and Representative Leslie Harrod wrote the foreword. And in the foreword, she said something like, there's been no political movement in history without art at the center of it. Which gets back to your earlier question about just like the effect of what we're doing, that kind of thing. And I had never really thought about that, but I think that the power that art has is that it can take the things that are intangible that we don't have any way of describing, and it can put it into a tangible form. And once it's in a tangible form, then people can take action on it. So like when you look at the civil rights movement, there were a lot of like freedom songs, gospel songs, that kind of thing. When you look at like a lot of earlier revolutions, there's like poetry that's, talking about oppression. There's paintings, there's all different forms of art that are creating a more tangible way of dealing with these things that just kind of float around us. And once those things are identified, then suddenly movements can kind of coalesce around it.
Yeah, I think that's a great reminder. I know, when was it Kendrick Lamar won the Pulitzer Prize a couple years ago? It was like, ooh, an art, like a rap artist could win this, what was normally just like this newspaper or media or comic award. But you're right, there is the idea that art can help shift or change people's perspectives, especially in times that we're living in now. And I say that in air quotes, but there are, when you look historically at what's going on in the political landscape in our country, there haven't been too many times like this. And I think it's really important to see how other artists, whether they're writing for The Daily Show or they're writing an article or have a documentary they're getting out, you see all these people trying to make sense of the times we're living in. So, and I think that's, again, the beauty of what both of you are doing with What I Miss is really help getting it out there so other people can react to it and other people can share it or just understand or help them understand what's going on in the world. So,
yeah. I was speaking at a high school this morning, and you don't know this about me, but I don't really believe in the morning. So it was a hard thing to get up and do it.
I got your note that you sleep in, and I was like, oh, that's brilliant. I love that. We don't have to do an early one.
Right. And in fact, I basically went to sleep and then got up to do this. So that's been my day. But one of the kids asked a question about, like, they were saying, it seems like people look at art less and less. Do you think art is still relevant? And I was like, no, I don't think that's true. I don't think people look at art less. I think that they interact with it differently. Like the delivery method of art has changed. Like even if you're scrolling through TikTok, most of those videos are some form of art. Like somebody had to think through, especially like the funny ones. Somebody had to write it, they had to act. It's just a different delivery system.
Yeah.
And people who post live drawings of, like comics or whatever art they do. But I think in many ways people are interacting with art more than ever because it's more accessible now.
Yeah. Cori, what are your thoughts on that? How do you think art is changed, or what's the, to Alan's point, answering the question, is it the delivery system or is the intent all still there?
I think art is as intentional and political as it ever was. I think that maybe for kids who ask questions like that, the art is so integrated into our culture and society that people forget what they're seeing is art. They forget that graffiti on the wall is art, or that the song they're listening to is art. There's a tendency to think art is the thing that goes in a gallery or a museum. And I mean, that's when you tell somebody you're an artist, they're always like, oh, have you ever had your art in a gallery? And I mean, yeah, but that is not that is a tiny part of what I've done. That's not how people usually interface with my art.
Yeah.
So I think it's more. I think that if art was absent from your life, you would suddenly be very conscious of it.
Yeah, there's a great line from the book from Rick Rubin he came out with last year, The Creative Act, A Way of Being. It ends the whole book, and it's however you frame yourself as an artist, the frame is still too small. And I think going back to what you said, I think people have this construct, Cori, of it's got to be this gallery or this, but at the end of the day, I think it's as he says in the book, like a creative way of being. It's how we interact and how we create in the world rather than where it showcases in the world. Because again, that's like such a different way of seeing it. It's not always a gallery. It's not always even a digital, newspaper. It's in so many different ways you can bring it to life these days. No, I think this has been great. Couple of questions I just wanted to follow up with because I want to be cognitive of time. I think we're at like 46 minutes. We talked earlier about Bill Watterson, and I just want to see, because it's so funny how that comic still has so much life and so much integrity. So I just wanted to kind of loop back to Bill Watterson. I watched a couple weeks ago, and he wouldn't sell out. So everyone's like, oh, he never did those Calvin peeing on blank stickers that you see everywhere. And he wrote in a newspaper about how he wouldn't sell out, and he didn't want to ever see his stuffed dolls or T-shirts like Charles Schulz did. I just wanted to see, are there elements of what Bill did in Calvin and Hobbes? Obviously, it seemed like it affected both of you, but I just kind of want to unearth a little bit of like the impact that someone like Bill Watterson had on both of you. Personally, I loved him, but later I was more of a Outland Bloom County guy of the Opus and Bill.
Forget? Yes, Bloom County.
Burt
Huge.
Beather, Bloom County. I got into that, and everyone loved the Far Side because it was just so different. And then I was also reading the editorial section. But I just want to loop back of Bill Watterson and his impact on both of you, because I think the DNA of what he was about and what he stood for definitely lives in both of your work. But just want to have you unpack and kind of circle back on what impact he had on you.
I'll say that's a high compliment.
Yeah, thank you. I would say, so for me, the style that I decided to do the comic with was very heavily influenced by him because, first of all, I mean, I've changed it up over time, but at the beginning I was doing watercolor for all of my coloring. I mean, digital watercolor, but still, that was whenever he did color in his books, he did watercolors. I also knew that he fought really hard against the 3-panel structure and tried to do creative things with it, especially on Sundays when he was doing, a half-page comic. He would challenge that, the panel, structure and do creative things with it. And I really wanted to do that. And so when I do my comics, I try to, think, is there another way I could do this besides just panels? And I don't always have an idea, and I do tend to fall back on, my 3 main structures. But when I can, I'll just blow that apart and do something different, and that is 100% down to Bill Watterson.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think you're exactly right. The fact that for Sundays especially, and it kind of goes back to both of you, of like, oh, I have this vision, we want to make them 7 weeks out. The fact that he had that time to think through, because I think Sundays he could mail in later. It wasn't the daily grind, literally, but that gave him like an independent story for Sundays that the dailies didn't have.
Yeah. Well, I want to say I really like. Well, yeah, I was really when we had the chance to do this, I was thinking mostly of Calvin and Hobbes, and I think even though our comic is very different, I would say, but these sort of vulnerability, well-defined characters, that was really important to me, particularly showing a young black man having a vulnerable relationship, because so much of media is showing young black men as like, I don't know, unfeeling beasts in a lot of ways, you know. So it was really beautiful to me, Cori, that you could show Ozzy's humanity and vulnerability. Because I've had struggles with other artists that I've worked with when there's a young black male character that they want to make their body language aggressive when that's not the kind of character, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, that vulnerability, that being able to talk about really hard things in very human ways, that's something that that I definitely came from Watterson. I also want to, on a side note, when you look at early Peanuts, you know, like Charlie Brown, it
Mm-hmm.
looks completely different than what we know.
Yeah.
Or like when we look at early Garfield, same thing. And a lot of these creators, you see the process happen over years. But Corey, in our first book, we see like the earliest Aussie and Myra, and it's like you're finding it. But I swear, like in maybe 8 strips, you got it. It's like you found them and they're there. And it's really kind of cool to see that progression happen so fast and so powerfully.
I'm glad you
Yeah.
think that because I still think that they morph from panel to panel. So I'm, I'm glad that other people see it differently.
No, but it is something, you're right. I didn't even think about that. From year one and seeing, when we all met, had the big party, the 1 year celebration, the
Yeah.
way the panels on display and just reading it myself, to even last year when you guys won like Top of the Rockies best comic. Uh, they really haven't changed that much. And I totally agree. There might be some small subtle differences, but I think that's the beauty, that it hasn't been this good, bad, or indifferent, an evolution of their shapes or their facial structure, their hair. Because again, you want to pick it up and just go, oh, here are the characters, and I don't have to understand who's who. So I think that's a great observation, that they didn't morph or change too much. Yeah, they've been pretty consistent.
Yeah. Sometimes when the artist changes on something or the art changes, it feels like your favorite characters have been recast. You know,
Yeah.
it's big Aunt Viv energy. You know, and you're like, who are these strangers? You know.
No, that's great. No, I totally agree, and I think it's a testament to, again, I think that shorthand you both have, and that trust I think both of you have with each other, of getting the right script, having the freedom, the autonomy to create, and for Cori to refine, change, tweak. But then I think it's also honest and really vulnerable, what you said too, Cori, of, I think they change, from panel to panel. Because I think as an artist, you're never like, ooh, I'm 100% like, yeah, that's it. You always want to see them morph and change a little bit, or you have your own expectation. But I think that's the beauty of the craft of what we do is, some weeks it's going to feel like you've dialed it in, you've got it just right. And other weeks you're like, ooh, how could I change, Myra or ever so much, or how could I change this ever so much to make it feel like it's evolving? But
Mhm.
knowing when to put the pen down is half the battle sometimes.
I also want to say, from week to week, you know, sometimes I'm like, what do I need an idea? What's the idea? And I feel like, oh, that idea was garbage, you know, and like, but you know, it's the best one I had. But then at the end of the year, when I have to go back through the whole years in order to submit for awards, I go back and read them all and pick the top three. I'm like, wait, these were all pretty good. Like, we're much more like consistent quality wise than I feel like in the moment, you know?
Mm.
And so that's kind of a pleasant surprise. I don't know if you go through that, Jim, but I certainly have that.
No, I totally do. And I think it is one of those things where I feel like I faked my way through one, and I'm like, oh man, how did I even do that? I don't really want to look
Right.
at it. But when you do, you're right. When you do the retrospect, you're like, oh, that line work turned out way better than I thought on that. Or like the little
Right.
things, you're like, oh, that was a funnier line than I thought. So completely agree. I think the consistency is built over time.
Well, I think
And
too
Cori,
that
do you feel the same way when you look back?
yeah, well, and also I suspect that when Alan is maybe feeling like he didn't put a lot on the page, he just basically gave me more of an opportunity to do something. So,
Oh
Mm.
yeah.
that's there's a balance, and it can work both ways. So I don't think that he has weak weeks, because there's always something that we can, do collaboratively to make it strong.
That's great. Yeah.
Oh, here's another thing that I think is important to say. So, because we're dealing with issues that happen in the world, it's vital to me to not take the position that we have all the answers, right?
Mm.
So I try not to engage with an issue unless I have some kind of unique perspective, where it's like, am I asking a thought-provoking question? Am I showing how it affects somebody in real life? Because I think that's our greatest contribution. Because when it comes to actually resolving whatever the issue is, there are people who are much more qualified. Like there are people who work within those, arenas or have studied or whatever. But I think it's important for us to examine and ask these questions from a very human perspective. And I think that that is the strength of what we're able to do with these editorial cartoons.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. And I think that's often what gets lost in the cultural narrative, where everyone thinks their opinion matters.
Right.
That you can set it up and not say it. And I think that's the beautiful part of what you just said, is not coming from a position where, yes, we don't have all the answers. And that's a position of strength these days that I think is getting lost. But to put something out there that makes people question their beliefs or question a particular topic, that's what I think is, again, kind of getting to it again. The beauty of what you both do is putting those thoughts, planting those seeds, and seeing the reaction you get. But I guess I never looked at it like that until you just said it, of you're not trying to sway anyone, but you're just trying to get people to think differently about a particular topic that's happening. So that's a beautiful way of putting it. It doesn't have to be a political figure. I should qualify that. Sorry.
To the chain so I can see the grades too.
You had something, would love to see that as well.
Hey, this has been a cool conversation. It's really cool to hear your experience working with the son and doing stuff. It's just, these are conversations we've never had before, but it's cool to hear like how it happens for you and what your process is too.
No, thanks. Yeah, no, again, I'm always open to getting any cheat notes I can, or cheat codes I can, of what your process is like. And it's great to see and hear just the collaboration you both have, and the time and attention you put into something so valuable. And again, I think the construct of what you do week in and week out, knowing you're going to hit 300 this year, is such an important narrative of what's going on in the world, that it's just important. And I just want to encourage you both just to, keep putting the foot on the gas every week and coming up with great work. So thank you both for all the work, and thank you both for taking time today to join the podcast.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you for having us. It's fun.
Yeah.